The leather-bound book was cold in Calla's hands, the chill seeping through her thin wool gloves. It was always cold in the scriptorium, a damp, stone-floored room off the side of the village elder's house. Dust motes danced in the single beam of an afternoon sun that fought its way through the grimy window pane, illuminating the stack of ledgers she was meant to be transcribing. Her fingers ached, not just from the cold, but from the tight grip she kept on her quill, scratching out the village's petty accounts. So many bushels of wheat, so many barrels of salted fish. Her life measured in ink and parchment. A sharp rap on the door made her jump. Her mother stood there, a thin, pinched woman with eyes the color of a winter sky. Disappointment was her mother's native tongue. "Still hiding in here with your dusty friends?" Elspeth's voice was a whip crack in the quiet room. "The other girls are mending the nets. Real work." Calla kept her eyes on the page. "Elder Maeve asked me to finish the ledgers." "The elder indulges you," her mother snapped. "Thinks because you can read the strange marks, you're special. You're not. You're a daughter of this village, and you shirk your duties." The familiar shame, hot and suffocating, rose in Calla's chest. She was a scholar in a village of fishers and farmers, an oddity, a burden. Her father, a trader who had brought back books from distant cities, had been the only one who understood. But he was 5 years gone, his ship and all hands lost to a sudden squall. All he'd left her were the books and a hunger for a world beyond the scent of drying fish. "The men are back from the ridge," her mother continued, her voice dropping, gaining a new, sharper edge of fear. "They said the smoke is closer. Another village gone." Calla's blood ran cold, a chill that had nothing to do with the room. For a week, the rumors had flown, carried by frantic refugees and terrified travelers. The Alpha King's wolf, a beast of nightmare, vast as an ox, with claws like scythes and a coat the color of a storm cloud. It had lost its mind, they said, razed 3 villages in the northern valleys, leaving nothing but ash, splinters, and blood. Now it was coming south. Coming for them. "They're saying King Carden has finally been consumed by his own power," Elspeth whispered, a morbid glee in her tone. "That the cold in his blood finally froze his soul. This is what happens to men who set themselves above the gods." Calla didn't answer. She knew the stories of the Alpha King, a ruler of impossible age and power, a man who had not been seen in the southern territories for a generation. They said he was more myth than man, a creature of ice and shadow who commanded the very winter. And his wolf was the executioner of his will. "Bar the doors tonight, and pray," her mother said, her final word a condemnation. Then she was gone, leaving Calla alone with the dancing dust and the creeping dread. She tried to return to her work, but the neat columns of numbers swam before her eyes. All she could see was smoke against a gray sky. All she could hear were the imagined screams. That night, the wind howled a mournful song around the eaves of their small cottage. Calla lay on her cot, listening to the terrified silence of the village. Every creak of the floorboards, every skittering sound from the thatch, was the monster arriving. She drifted into a restless sleep, only to be torn from it by a sound that was not the wind. It was a crash, a splintering of wood, coming from the barn. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She sat bolt upright, straining to hear over her own panicked breaths. Silence. Then a low, guttural sound. A sound of immense pain. Her mother's door remained shut. She was likely frozen in fear, praying as she'd been told. Calla, however, felt a strange and terrible curiosity pull her from the cot. She slipped on her worn leather boots, her hands trembling as she laced them. This was madness. Stay inside. Bar the door. That was the command. That was survival. But the sound came again. It wasn't a roar of triumph. It was a groan of agony. It sounded less like a monster and more like a dying animal. Her father had taught her that. He'd taught her to read, yes, but he'd also taught her that you don't let a living thing suffer if you can help it, not even a field mouse in a trap. Taking the small oil lamp from the hearth, its flame flickering and weak, she unlatched her door. The cold night air was a slap to the face. The barn stood silhouetted against the moonless sky, a hulking shadow with a new, jagged hole in its side where the doors had been broken. She crept across the muddy yard, her boots making soft, sucking sounds. Every instinct screamed at her to turn back, to hide under her thin blanket and wait for morning. But the memory of that sound pushed her forward. The smell hit her first. Blood, sharp and coppery. And something else. The scent of a winter storm, of pine needles crushed underfoot, and the ozone tang of lightning. It was a wild, clean scent layered over the familiar barn smells of hay and manure. She peered through the broken doorway, holding the lamp high. Its light was a pathetic weapon against the cavernous dark. The shadows writhed and danced. And then she saw it. It was impossibly large, a heap of dark fur slumped in the center of the barn. It was bigger than their plow horse, its shoulders a mountain range of muscle even in repose. A massive head rested on the hay-strewn floor, and one great golden eye swiveled to fix on her. The Alpha King's wolf. Fear, pure and absolute, seized her. Her legs turned to water. The lamp trembled in her hand, threatening to extinguish. This was the beast that had devoured villages. This was the end of her world. It tried to lift its head, a low growl rumbling in its chest, a sound like stones grinding together. The growl hitched, turning into a pained whine. Its flank was a mess of torn flesh and dark matted fur. A broken spear shaft, a relic from some desperate village guard, jutted from just below its ribs. The wound was black and festering, radiating not heat, but a visible frost that crept along its fur. The creature was dying. The golden eye held hers. There was no rage in it, no malice, only a bottomless, weary pain. And in that moment, Kala saw something else. A flicker. Not with her eyes, but in her mind. A flash of a forest blurring past, the sting of wind, the roar of flame. Not from its mouth, but all around it. A scream, torn from a throat that was both wolf and man, an agony of losing control. The vision vanished as quickly as it came, leaving her dizzy and nauseous. What was that? A trick of the light? Of her fear? The wolf let out a soft huff, its breath pluming in the cold air it seemed to generate around itself. The golden eye blinked, slowly. It wasn't a threat. It was a surrender. Kala took one trembling step into the barn, then another. The monster that had razed 3 villages had crawled into her barn to die, and it was looking at her, as if she were the only person in the world who could decide its fate. The next morning, the village discovered the broken barn doors. Panic erupted like a flung stone in a still pond. Men gathered with pitchforks and hunting spears, their faces pale but resolute. "Aini, it's here!" shouted Fendrel, the blacksmith, his heavy arms brandishing a hammer. "The beast is in the barn!" Kala stood in their way, a slight, trembling figure at the shattered entrance. She had spent the night watching the creature, her lamp burning low. It hadn't moved, save for the shallow rise and fall of its chest. "Stay back," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Get out of the way, girl," Fendrel snarled. "We have to kill it before it wakes." "It's injured," she pleaded. "It's dying." Her mother appeared at her side, grabbing her arm in a painful grip. "Kala, have you lost your mind? Get away from there." "No," Kala said, and the word felt foreign and powerful on her tongue. She pulled her arm free. "It hasn't hurt anyone here. It's just lying there." A brave soul, a young man named Tor, crept forward and peered into the gloom. He yelped and scrambled back. "It's there! Just like they said. Gods, it's huge!" The wolf lifted its head, a massive effort that seemed to cost it everything. A low growl, weak but still menacing, rumbled from its chest. It stared past Kala, at the crowd of armed men, and its lip curled back to reveal teeth like daggers. The men flinched, but then its gaze fell on Kala, and the growl died in its throat. The great head lowered back to the hay. It let out a soft puff of air, a sigh of exhaustion. It wouldn't let anyone near, except her. It's bewitched her, someone muttered. She's always been strange, another added. Her mother's face was a mask of fury and humiliation. Kala, I am warning you, step aside now. I will not, Kala said, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. She looked from her mother's cold fury to the pained, exhausted eye of the beast. For the first time in her life, she was not choosing the path of least resistance. She was choosing the path that felt, impossibly, right. You will not harm it. The standoff lasted for an hour. The wolf remained still, a mountain of dying fury. The villagers remained just outside, their courage warring with their terror. Finally, Elder Maeve arrived, her face grim. She assessed the scene, the defiant girl, the terrified mob, the broken barn. She looked at Kala. Is this your doing? I'm only stopping them from doing something foolish, Kala replied. It's in pain, Maeve. Can't you see? The elder peered into the barn, her eyes sharp. She saw the spear shaft. She saw the frost. She saw the way the beast tracked Kala's every movement, not as prey, but as an anchor. It will die on its own by nightfall, Maeve declared to the crowd. The frost rot on that wound is a death sentence. There is no need to risk your lives. We will bar the barn from the outside and let nature take its course. It was a compromise, a death sentence delivered with diplomacy. The men grumbled but slowly dispersed, their lust for battle cooled by the elder's logic and their own lingering fear. Her mother was the last to leave. She grabbed Kala's shoulder, her nails digging in. You have shamed us all today, she hissed, her voice low and venomous. When that thing is dead, you and I will have a reckoning. Kala watched her go, a cold knot of dread tightening in her stomach. She was alone, truly alone, with a dying monster and a village that now saw her as its accomplice. She turned back to the barn. The wolf's golden eye was on her. Gratitude? Understanding? She couldn't be sure. She took a bucket, filled it with water from the well, and carried it back to the entrance. Her hands were shaking so badly that water sloshed over the rim. She set the bucket down, just inside the doorway, a safe distance away. Here, she whispered. Water. The wolf did not move. It watched her, its gaze unwavering. The days that followed were a secret, whispered existence. Kala became a creature of shadows and stolen moments. By day, she endured her mother's venomous silence and the suspicious glares of the villagers. By night, she slipped out to the barn. Elder Maeve's pronouncement had been wrong. The wolf did not die. It clung to life with a stubbornness that defied the festering wound and the creeping frost. The first night, she had only brought water. The second, she brought a bowl of thin broth, left over from their own meager supper. She left it by the bucket and retreated, watching from the shadows. Hours passed. Finally, the great head lifted. The wolf dragged itself, whimpering with the effort, the few feet to the bowls. It lapped at the water, then the broth, its tongue rough against the ceramic. A small victory, a flicker of impossible hope. Each night she moved the bowls a little closer. She started talking to it, her voice a low murmur against the vast listening silence of the barn. She didn't know why. It felt less foolish than sitting in silence. They're afraid of you, she whispered one night, huddled by the doorway. But I think you're afraid too. The wolf's ear twitched. She read to it. She brought one of her father's books, a collection of histories from the southern kingdoms. She sat on a hay bale just inside the door and read aloud, her voice soft and steady. The stories were of brave queens and forgotten magic, of cities built in the hearts of mountains. The wolf would lie still, its golden eyes fixed on her. The low growl that had greeted her at first had vanished, replaced by a quiet watchfulness. The cold that radiated from its body seemed less biting, the frost around its wound no longer spreading. One night she saw another flicker. A vision. She was sitting with her book, and as she looked at the wolf, the image wavered. She saw a man, pale and shuddering, lying in the same spot. He was huge, broad-shouldered, with a tangle of dark hair plastered to his forehead with sweat. His face was contorted in agony, his hands clenched into fists. He was beautiful, in the way a storm is beautiful, terrifying and magnificent. The vision was so clear she could see the silver threads in his dark hair, the harsh line of his jaw. Then it was gone, and it was just the wolf again. It was him. The man from the vision was the wolf. The realization settled not with a shock, but with a strange sense of clarity, as if she were fitting the last piece into a puzzle she didn't know she was solving. He was a shifter, a man trapped in his wolf form by pain and injury. That night she decided she had to do more. The spear shaft was still embedded in his side, a constant source of poison and pain. It had to come out. She gathered her courage, along with a clean rag, a knife she'd sharpened on the grinding stone, and a bowl of hot water. She approached him slowly, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. "I'm not going to hurt you," she said, her voice trembling. "I want to help. This has to come out." She knelt beside the enormous creature. The sheer scale of him was dizzying. His fur was coarse beneath her questing fingers. He flinched at her touch, a deep tremor running through his body. A warning growl rumbled in his chest. "Easy," she crooned, her voice softer than she'd ever used it. "Easy now. I'm just looking." She gently cleared the matted, frosted fur from around the wound. The flesh beneath was a nightmare of black and purple. The wood of the spear shaft slick with a dark, oily substance. The cold emanating from it was intense, burning her fingertips. This was beyond her. She was a scribe, not a healer. What was she doing? As her fingers brushed the edge of the wound, another vision struck her. Stronger this time. Fire. So much fire. Not his fire, but the fire of burning homes. He was running, trying to contain it, trying to stop it. He was roaring, not in rage, but in grief. A man in armor had thrust the spear, not in a brave defense, but in a desperate, panicked attack, as the king's wolf tried to herd people away from a collapsing roof. The spear had been coated in something: nightshade, frost lichen, a poacher's poison designed to bring down massive beasts. He hadn't been razing the villages. He had been trying to save them. The destruction was the result of a fire, an accident, and he, the monster of the stories, had been caught in the middle of it, trying to help. The poison on the spear was what was consuming him, amplifying his power, freezing him from the inside out. The vision left her gasping, tears streaming down her face. She looked down at the wolf, at the man trapped inside, and her heart ached with a grief that was not her own. "Oh, you poor thing," she whispered, her hand resting on his head. His fur was surprisingly soft here, behind the ears. "You poor, brave, stupid thing," he whined, a soft, pathetic sound from such a mighty creature, and leaned his massive head into her touch. The boundary of fear she had so carefully maintained for days simply dissolved. It wasn't a monster. It was a man, and he was in agony. With newfound resolve, she gripped the spear shaft. "This is going to hurt," she said, as much to herself as to him. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." She pulled. The wolf roared, a sound of pure, unadulterated agony that shook the very timbers of the barn. He thrashed, his massive body convulsing. Calla was thrown back, landing hard on the packed earth floor. The spear, now free, was still in her hand, its tip dripping a black, viscous fluid that sizzled as it hit the hay. For a terrifying moment she thought she had killed him. The wolf lay utterly still. Then, a shudder ran through him. A ripple of light, like heat haze, shimmered over his fur. The form of the wolf began to blur, to collapse in on itself. The massive shoulders shrank, the long snout receded. Where the mountain of black fur had been, there was now a man. He was naked, sprawled in the hay, his body a roadmap of scars and new wounds. He was the man from her vision. Dark hair, pale skin, a face carved from harsh angles and breathtaking sorrow. He was shivering violently, his teeth chattering, even as the air around him remained unnaturally cold. He pushed himself up onto one elbow, his golden eyes, now startlingly human, finding hers. They were filled with confusion, pain, and a flicker of something else, gratitude. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a dry, rasping cough came out. He collapsed back into the hay, unconscious. Calla stared, her heart feeling too big for her chest. She had done it. She had freed him. But as she looked at the vulnerable, naked man lying in her barn, a new, more complicated fear took root. What in all the hells was she going to do now? Caring for a wounded wolf was one thing. Caring for a wounded, naked king was another thing entirely. She found an old horse blanket, thick and scratchy, and draped it over him. His skin was shockingly cold, not the clammy cold of fever, but a deep, penetrating ice that seemed to emanate from his very bones. The wound in his side was no longer black, but it was still an angry red, weeping clear fluid. She cleaned it as best she could, her hands clumsy, her cheeks burning. He remained unconscious for 2 days. Calla's life became a frantic, secret dance. She tended to him, dribbling water and thin broth past his lips, keeping the wound clean and talking to him, always talking. She told him about her father, about her books, about the suffocating smallness of her life. He was the most attentive audience she had ever had. Her mother's suspicion grew with every passing day. Elspeth watched her with narrowed eyes, noting the food that went missing from the larder, the exhaustion that shadowed Calla's face. "You look like a ghost," Elspeth said one evening, blocking Calla's path as she tried to slip out after dark. "Where do you go at night?" "Just for a walk," Calla lied, her heart pounding. "There are still wolves in the woods, Calla, or have you forgotten?" The question was pointed, venomous. "The beast in the barn is dead," the men checked. "They found the body gone and a great deal of blood. They think it crawled away to die. But you and I know better, don't we?" Calla's blood ran cold. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice tight. Her mother's laugh was a dry, rasping sound. "You were always a terrible liar, just like your father, full of secrets and foolish dreams." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was more frightening than her shouting. "What is it you're hiding, daughter? Another stray animal? Or is it the monster itself? Did you heal it?" Calla couldn't speak. The truth was a stone in her throat. Elspeth's eyes glittered with a strange, triumphant light. "I see. You think you've tamed it? You think you're special? You are a fool, Calla. You have brought a curse upon this house." That night he woke up. Calla was changing the dressing on his wound when his eyes fluttered open. They were no longer hazy with pain, but sharp and clear. He looked at her, then at the blanket covering him, then at the clean bandage on his side. "You," he rasped, his voice deep and rough from disuse. Calla jumped back, startled. "You're awake." He pushed himself into a sitting position, the blanket pooling around his waist. He was weaker than he looked, his movements stiff and pained, but there was an undeniable power thrumming just beneath his skin. You pulled it out. The spear. It was poisoned, she said, finding her voice. You would have died. He looked at her, a long, searching look that made her feel as if he were reading the secret history of her soul. Why? It was a simple question, but it held the weight of everything. Why risk her life? Why defy her village? Why help the monster everyone feared? She started, but she had no easy answer. You were in pain, and I saw. I saw what happened. It wasn't your fault. His eyes widened slightly. You saw? Flickers. Echoes. I don't know what they are, she confessed. I saw the fire. I saw you trying to help. A profound weariness settled over his features, aging him 100 years in a single moment. My name is Carden, he said, and the name hung in the air, heavy with unspoken power. He was confirming it. He was the king. I know, she whispered. No one has ever seen, he murmured, more to himself than to her. No one ever looked past the wolf. He looked at his own hands, large and scarred, as if they were foreign to him. The cold. It's a curse. My bloodline. When our emotions run too high, rage, grief, even joy, we lose control. The power surges and it freezes everything it touches. Me, most of all. It all clicked into place. The destruction. The unnatural cold. He wasn't a monster. He was a man with a terrible, beautiful power he could not control. The poison, he continued, his voice strained. It amplified it. Broke the locks I've spent centuries building. I couldn't get back. I was trapped in the wolf, in the pain. He looked at her, and his gaze was raw with a vulnerability that stole her breath. Until you. A comfortable silence fell between them. For the first time, Calla didn't feel the need to fill it. They were simply two people in a barn, sharing a secret that could get them both killed. I'm Calla, she said finally. A small, sad smile touched his lips. I know, he said, and the way he said it made her name sound like a prayer. The next day, her mother acted. Calla was in the scriptorium, trying to focus on her work, her mind still reeling from the night's revelations. She was so lost in thought that she didn't hear the approaching footsteps until it was too late. The door burst open. It wasn't her mother. It was Elder Maeve, and behind her, Fendril the blacksmith, and 3 other grim-faced men from the village council. Calla, Maeve said, her voice devoid of its usual warmth. Your mother has told us everything. Calla's heart plummeted. Told you what? That you have been harboring the beast? Fendril growled, stepping forward. That you lied to us. That you've been tending to the monster that destroyed our neighbors. He's not a monster, Calla cried, getting to her feet. He's a man. He was injured. Maeve's eyes were cold. Your mother found this in the barn. She held up the tattered, blood-stained blanket Calla had used to cover him. She said she heard a man's voice. She said you called him by a name. Betrayal, sharp and absolute, pierced Calla through. Her mother hadn't just told them. She had provided proof. She had twisted the truth into a weapon. She's lying, Calla said, her voice shaking. She hates me. She's always hated me. We are going to the barn, Calla, Maeve said, her tone final. And if we find what your mother says we will find, then may the gods have mercy on your soul. They marched her across the village square. People came out of their homes, their faces a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity. They pointed. They whispered. The monster's whore, she heard someone say. The words were like stones, bruising her spirit. Her mother was waiting for them at the barn, her arms crossed, a look of grim satisfaction on her face. This was it. Her moment of triumph. She had finally proven to the village what she had always believed. That her daughter was strange, useless, and dangerous. He's in there, Elspeth said, pointing at the barn. She's been hiding him, protecting him. Open the doors, Maeve commanded. Fendrel and another man put their shoulders to the broken doors, shoving them aside. The dark interior of the barn gaped open like a wound. Calla's heart was a frantic bird in her chest. Carden was still weak. He couldn't fight them all. He couldn't run. They shoved her forward, into the barn. "Call him out, girl," Fendrel snarled, brandishing a pitchfork. "Or we go in and drag him out." "Please," Calla begged, turning to Maeve. "You don't understand. He's the king." Her words were met with derisive laughter. "The king?" Maeve scoffed. "The king is a myth who lives in a palace of ice 1,000 miles from here. That thing in there is a rabid animal, and you are a fool." "He is not." From the shadows at the back of the barn, a figure emerged. It was Carden. He was wearing a pair of her father's old trousers she had brought him, the fit absurdly tight on his massive frame. He was pale and unsteady, but he was standing. He moved to place himself in front of Calla, a shield between her and the mob. The villagers gasped. It was true. A man. A wild, terrifying-looking man, but a man nonetheless. "Leave her alone," Carden said, his voice low and rumbling with nascent power. This only enraged Fendrel. "See? The monster speaks. It's a demon, a skinwalker." The crowd surged forward, their fear turning to rage. They were a wave of torches and steel, ready to crash down on them. Carden pushed Calla behind him, his stance widening. He was preparing to fight, to die, for her. "No," Calla screamed, trying to get around him. Her mother's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and triumphant. "See, Maeve, I told you. She would choose the monster over her own people. She is a traitor." The villagers paused, their eyes turning to Calla. They saw her, a small woman standing with a monster, defying her own kin. In their eyes, her mother's accusation was proven true. They grabbed her. Rough hands tore her away from Carden's protection. Fendrel held the tines of his pitchfork to her throat. "Don't!" Carden roared, and the temperature in the barn dropped 10 degrees. Frost spiderwebbed across the floor from his bare feet. "Stay back, demon!" Fendrel shouted, pressing the pitchfork harder against Calla's skin. A thin trickle of blood welled up. "Or the girl dies." Carden froze, his face a mask of helpless fury. His power, the very thing that made him a king, was useless. To use it would be to risk her life. He was trapped. They were both trapped. Calla looked at her mother, who stood watching, her face impassive. This was what she wanted. Calla's destruction. Her final public humiliation. "Mother, please," Calla whispered, tears blurring her vision. Elspeth's face remained a mask of stone, but her eyes burned with a cold, triumphant fire. The villain had won. She had Calla exactly where she wanted her. "This is for your own good, daughter," Elspeth said, her voice loud enough for the whole village to hear. "Some sickness must be burned out." The words were a lie, a performance for the crowd. But as Calla looked into her mother's eyes, she saw the raw, unvarnished truth. It wasn't for her own good. It was punishment. For being her father's daughter. For loving books. For being different. For not being the daughter Elspeth wanted. Carden stood helpless, radiating a cold fury that made the air crackle. The villagers, emboldened by his inaction, closed in. Fendrel's grip on the pitchfork was white-knuckled, the tines biting into Calla's skin. Fear was a physical thing, a metallic taste in her mouth. She was going to die here, in the filth of her own barn, condemned as a traitor. She looked from Carden's agonized face to the triumphant sneer on her mother's. This was her mother's masterpiece, the final act of a lifetime of small cruelties and biting resentments. "I love you," Carden choked out, the words torn from him, a desperate confession in the face of death. It wasn't a romantic whisper. It was a cry of despair, a statement of fact that was about to get them both killed. The air around him shimmered with a terrible, contained power. He was going to break. He was going to lose control to save her, and in doing so, he would likely kill everyone, including himself. "Don't," she whispered back, a single tear tracing a path through the grime on her cheek. It was then that her mother delivered the final killing blow, not with a weapon, but with words. Elspeth stepped forward, her face a mask of false sympathy. "She was always a strange, sickly child," Elspeth said to the crowd, her voice dripping with pity. "Weak, like her father. It's a mercy he's not here to see this. I should have let you die with him on that worthless, sinking ship." The words struck Calla with the force of a physical blow. All her life, she had carried the secret grief of her father's death, a grief her mother had never once shared or acknowledged. She had clung to the rage she felt toward her mother, the anger at her coldness, her cruelty. That rage had been a shield, a wall she had built around her heart. But hearing those words, seeing the raw, unveiled hatred in her mother's eyes, something inside Calla shifted. The rage was a poison. It had kept her small. It had kept her trapped in this village, defined by her mother's bitterness. To hold on to it now would be to let her mother win completely. In that moment, suspended between life and death, Calla did the hardest thing she had ever done. She let it go. She forgave her mother. Not for Elspeth's sake, but for her own. She released the anger, the pain, the desperate need for an apology she would never receive. She released it all, and in the sudden, shocking emptiness it left behind, something else rushed in. It started as a flicker behind her eyes, the echo, her strange, secret sense. But this time it did not flicker. It ignited. The barn, the villagers, the fear, it all dissolved. She was no longer just seeing echoes of the past. She was standing in the river of time itself. She saw the threads of every life in the barn, glowing cords of past, present, and future. She saw Fendrel's past, a childhood of hunger that made him cruel and fearful. She saw Maeve's future, a lonely old age filled with regret for this day. She saw her mother's thread, a bitter, twisted cord that ended abruptly, choked by its own venom. And she saw Carden's thread, a brilliant, blazing silver gold intertwined with her own. The power, her power, unspooled from her like a physical force. It was not fire or light, it was truth. A wave of it washed out from her, silent and invisible. It wasn't an attack. It was a gift. A terrible, beautiful gift. She shared her vision. Every person in the barn suddenly saw what she had seen. They felt the searing heat of the accidental fire in that northern village. They felt Carden's panic, his desperate, roaring grief as he tried to save the very people who now hunted him. They felt the agony of the poisoned spear, the cold that threatened to shatter his soul. They felt his centuries of loneliness, the crushing weight of a power he could not control. And they felt Calla's fear, her quiet desperation, her small, brave acts of kindness. They saw the man through her eyes, not a monster, a king, a hero, a victim. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. Fendrel dropped the pitchfork as if it were burning hot, his face ashen. He stumbled back, his eyes wide with a horror that was now directed at himself. Maeve let out a strangled sob, covering her mouth with a trembling hand. The other villagers recoiled, their faces masks of shame and dawning comprehension. They had been a mob. They had been the monsters. The only one untouched by the wave of empathy was her mother. Elspeth stared at Calla, her face contorted in a snarl of pure hatred and fear. "What did you do?" she shrieked. "What are you?" Calla had no answer. She felt drained, hollowed out, but also, for the first time in her life, whole. She looked at Carden. The contained power around him had subsided, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated awe. He walked toward her, his steps sure and steady. The villagers parted for him like water before a ship's bow. They no longer saw a wild man. They saw their king. He stopped in front of her, ignoring everyone else. He gently touched the cut on her neck, his thumb brushing away the single drop of blood. His touch wasn't cold. It was warm. A steady, living warmth. Calla, he breathed, his voice full of reverence. The breaking point had passed. The crisis was over. But in its wake, everything had changed. Carden did not raise his voice. He did not need to. His presence was enough. He turned his golden gaze from Calla to the stunned and silent villagers. The authority that rolled off him was a palpable force, ancient and absolute. "You will leave," he said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of command. It was not a request. It was the ordering of reality. "You will go to your homes, and you will reflect on what it means to be ruled by fear." One by one, the villagers turned and shuffled away, their heads bowed in shame. Fendrel couldn't meet her eyes. Elder Maeve lingered for a moment, her face a mess of regret. "Forgive us," she whispered. Then she too was gone. Soon only 3 people remained in the barn, Calla, Carden, and her mother. Elspeth had not moved. She stood frozen, her face pale, her triumphant sneer replaced by a mask of disbelief and terror. She looked from her daughter, who now seemed to shimmer with an unseen power, to the man who was so clearly a king. Her world, the small, bitter world she had ruled through shame and manipulation, had crumbled to dust around her. "You," Carden said, his voice dropping, losing its kingly command and taking on a personal, dangerous edge. He took a step toward her. "You did this. You hurt her." Elspeth flinched, a cornered rat facing a wolf. "She is my daughter. I did what was best." "No," Calla said, her voice quiet but firm. She put a hand on Carden's arm, stopping him. The warmth of his skin was a grounding force. This was her fight to finish. "No, you didn't. You did what was best for the bitterness you carry inside you. But it doesn't have to live in me anymore." She looked at the woman who had given her life, and then spent every day since trying to poison it. There was no anger left. Only a profound, aching pity. "I am not you," Calla said, "and I will not be defined by your hatred." Carden looked at Calla, a question in his eyes. He would have banished her, imprisoned her, or worse. But this was Calla's justice to mete out. "Go," Calla said to her mother. "Just go." For a moment, Elspeth stood her ground, defiance warring with fear. Then her shoulders slumped. She was defeated. Utterly. Without another word, she turned and walked out of the barn, a ghost leaving her own haunting grounds. Calla knew she would never see her again. The silence that descended was profound. It was just the two of them now, surrounded by the smell of hay and the lingering scent of ozone and truth. Carden turned to her, his hands coming up to gently cup her face. He searched her eyes, his expression a mixture of awe, relief, and a love so potent it made her knees weak. "Your power," he breathed. "It's truth. You make people see the truth." "I don't know what it is," she confessed, her voice trembling. It's never. "It's beautiful," he interrupted, his thumb stroking her cheek. "You are beautiful." He leaned in and pressed his forehead against hers. They stood like that for a long moment, simply breathing each other in, the king and the scribe, the wolf and the woman who had saved him. "You saved me, Calla, not just from the poison, from the cold, from centuries of being alone. You saved me too," she whispered, realizing it was true. He had seen her, truly seen her, before anyone else. He had trusted her when she was just a frightened girl with a bowl of broth. I love you, he said again. This time, it wasn't a cry of despair. It was a vow, a promise. The words didn't cause the air to freeze. They filled the barn with a gentle, pervasive warmth. The curse, she realized, wasn't about love. It was about uncontrolled emotion. With her, his anchor, his truth seer, he was not out of control. He was whole. I love you too, she replied, and the words were the truest thing she had ever said. He lowered his head and kissed her. It was not a king claiming his prize. It was a man, grateful and humbled, meeting his equal. It was a gentle kiss, a kiss of homecoming, of promises kept, and a future beginning. It tasted of relief and wood smoke, and the faint, lingering magic of a world set right. In the quiet of the barn, two broken souls finally found their reunion, not as a king and his subject, but as two halves of a single extraordinary whole. 3 months later, the capital city was a world away from Kala's quiet village. The stone towers of the citadel scraped a sky that was perpetually blue, a stark contrast to the gray, sea-sprayed skies of her home. She stood on a balcony overlooking the royal gardens, a gentle breeze stirring the silks of her gown, a gown the color of a summer dawn. She was still not used to the silks, or the servants who bowed as she passed, or the title they used when they addressed her, Your Grace. But she was getting used to the man who stood behind her, his arms wrapped securely around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. You're 1,000 miles away, Carden murmured, his voice a low rumble against her ear. Just remembering, she said, leaning back into his solid warmth. The unnatural cold was gone from him for good, replaced by a steady, comforting heat that was hers alone. The barn seems like a lifetime ago. In some ways, it was, he said. I was a different man then, a lesser one. She turned in his arms to face him. He was dressed in simple black leathers, having shed the formal trappings of his court the moment they were alone. He looked more like the man she had met in the hay than the king who commanded armies. His golden eyes, once filled with pain, now held only a deep, abiding love for her. You were never lesser, she said, tracing the line of his jaw. Just hurting. Her power, her sight, as Carden called it, had become a gift to his kingdom. She no longer saw uncontrolled flashes. With his help, she had learned to focus it. She could touch a treaty and see the echoes of lies or sincerity in its clauses. She could listen to a petitioner and sense the truth of their hardship. She had become the kingdom's heart, just as he was its strength. She didn't just advise him, she ruled with him. Down below in the gardens, a group of nobles were talking with Elder Maeve. Carden had summoned her from the village, not for punishment, but for counsel. He was rebuilding his kingdom not on fear, but on the principles of truth and empathy that Kala had shown him. Their village, once a forgotten backwater, was now a symbol of the new era. My mother? Kala asked, the question soft. She had not asked of her in all this time. Carden's arms tightened around her. She left the territories, went east. I have men watching, to ensure she causes no more harm, but she is free, as you wished. Kala nodded, a sense of peace settling in her heart. That chapter was closed. Good, she whispered. He smiled, a true, breathtaking smile that still made her heart skip a beat. Are you happy here, Kala? In all this stone and ceremony? She looked into his eyes, the man who was a king, who had been a wolf, who was her partner in all things. She thought of the cold scriptorium, the sting of her mother's words, the loneliness of being the strange girl who read books. My home is not a place, Carden, she said, her hand coming to rest on his chest, right over his heart. It's you. His smile widened, and he leaned down to kiss her, a slow, lingering kiss full of quiet joy and the promise of 1,000 more sunrises together. The world outside, with its politics and its lingering shadows, could wait. For now, in the warm circle of his arms, the Queen of Truth and her Alpha King were simply home.